And we are live. Blake, how's it going, man?
And it's going well, Dom. Good to see you.
Yeah,
How
good
was
to see you
the
too.
Easter weekend?
Yeah, it was wonderful. Nothing too wild or crazy. Did the Easter egg hunt with the kiddos.
No.
Just ton of fun. How about you?
Yeah, man. Same thing. Pretty relaxed. Got some Easter candy and some nice meals, so I can't complain.
Yeah, love it. Excellent. Well, I've been really looking forward to our show today, which is about benchmarking. And we're going to do a couple of different shows on this subject just because it is so important. And there's a lot of different components that are associated with benchmarking and doing it right and making sure that you're making the right decisions, not only for you as an organization, but for your employees as well. So, really excited to dig into it today. But Blake, perhaps you could kick us off and just kind of give us an overview on why it is so important to do this every
Yeah.
so often.
Well, and I think the term benchmarking makes it sound scarier than it actually is,
Totally,
right?
totally.
And if you have the right team around you, benchmarking plans is not that difficult. And if you have the right team, we make it easy for you. But to
Yeah,
take a step back, what is this benchmarking? Well, when you think of that term in the 401k or the qualified retirement plan space, it's just making sure that your plan for your specific entity, your company, your organization is up to standards of the industry, right? And we're not saying you have to do this benchmarking every 3 months, right? If you actually look into what the Department of Labor states, they recommend minimum every 2 to 3 years you do a benchmark. So when you hear this term and you hear someone bring up the idea of, well, when's the last time you benchmarked your plan? Think of it as just giving it a review, like making sure it's up to standards. And there's a lot of different aspects that we're going to dive into about what you look for in a benchmarking exercise. But again, the idea of it is just making sure your plan's up to industry par and up to industry standards.
yeah, no, absolutely. And one thing I will add, in terms of the DOL and their recommendations, it's every 2 to 3 years or when deemed reasonable. So if you've
Well
had
said, Dom.
substantial change in the employee demographic or the assets that are part of the plan, that can be a really good trigger point. I mean, I've seen a lot of organizations, they start out with 2, 3 employees and they end up just exploding. And now this, original 401k plan that was built for
Yeah,
2, 3 employees, now there's 50, right? And the total
yeah.
demographics of the organization has changed substantially. So 2 to 3 years, good rule of thumb, but also, factored in mind if you've had substantial change in the overall demographics and or assets in the plan, that could be a good trigger point too.
That's a phenomenal point, and I should have mentioned that as well, right? It's not necessarily just a time frame; it's also maybe your organization, your company's changed as well. So great point.
Yeah.
I think if you think about our retirement world and our industry, we're like one of the few services out there where you don't really get a renewal every year, right? When you think about insurance products, you usually get, whether it's a personal side of things or even for your business or commercial side of things, you get an annual review, right? So it kind of sparks you to maybe look at that and say, well, do I want to do this for another year? And there are notices you're supposed to get within 401k plans as an owner and as employees, but we really don't have this type of a renewal period, right? Where so like I think a lot of times our mutual clients and prospects, because they're not really given anything about, hey, you're going to be locked into another year, here's your renewal. I think it kind of gets slid under the rug, if that makes sense, right?
Really, yeah.
So when we dive into this idea of, okay, making sure your plan's up to industry standards, Dom, what do you think are some of the key areas we typically like to look at when we're doing a benchmark?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you said it well. The term benchmarking, can seem daunting and overwhelming, but this is
Yep.
basically breaking it down a little bit further. We're looking at key components and providers associated with your plan. So, looking at, not only just a fun lineup. I mean, I think when you hear the term benchmarking, people assume it's just, largely related to the fun lineup. Yes, that is a core component of it, but also looking at the record keeper, the advisor and the services they're providing to you as a plan sponsor and to the employees as well. In addition to the overall plan design, and if you have a bundled product, there may not be a TPA. You may have a TPA. So all of these components are an important part of the whole benchmarking process.
Well said. So I think what we should start with is that concept of services and what are you paying for in
Right.
that perspective. So I think even starting with from your point of view and your lens, the advisor, uh, I can speak from my own personal experience. There's a lot of plans out there where the client got set up with an advisor, they set the plan up, and then they never saw that advisor again. So when we're talking in terms of benchmarking and services, the first thing that is a great thing to look at is what is your current advisor offering from not just an investment review, and I'll let you touch on it, but also like employee education, right? Because that's such an important part to 401k plans, right?
Absolutely. I am so passionate about employee education, just because I've seen time and again, that is where the rubber hits the road. You got to have the best retirement plan offering in the world, but if your employees don't know about it, don't know how it applies to them specifically in their situation, and how to make use of it to help them achieve financial independence, like it's all for naught, right? And so having a quality support system for staff members is I think absolutely critical to offering a high quality retirement plan offering. And I've seen the difference in the psychology associated with this whole education process. You could have an employee who's been working at an organization for a while, they haven't taken advantage of their 401k plan, they might be feeling financially stressed and uncertain about their long-term future. With a quality education offering, you can help transition that frame of mind and that perspective of that employee. And when people know that they are on track for long-term financial security, the temptation to change jobs for a couple $1,000s more is far less, right? And so as far as the quality offering, I think there's just so many different ways that it is really enriching to the organization as a whole. Not only are your employees going to appreciate it more, they're going to feel over the long term less financially stressed. And if they feel confident with their current earnings and their current savings that they're on track for long-term financial security, again, that temptation to change jobs just dramatically reduces.
Absolutely. And I've heard these studies throughout my decade in the industry, but they're all pretty true in the sense that employees are more, what's the word I'm thinking of? Like, I don't want to say proactive, but they're more, their ability to do better work for your company shows when they have more of a financial security future, right? Financial secure future, right? So that's a key concept, right? Is getting that service from your advisor and making sure your employees do feel sound about their retirement and their financial future. Because if they are, then it shows typically in the statistics that they're going to be better employees for you as a business owner as well.
Absolutely. You're going to be far more productive. They're going to be
productive. I couldn't think of the word. Thank you. Exactly. I said proactive. Give me some credit. I was close. But no, exactly right, Dom. They're more. They show that they're more productive because there's less time stressing about emergency savings, retirement, et cetera, where they can really just focus, go to work and lock in. So I think there is a huge commonality to a secure future, a good advisor, and productive employees.
Absolutely. And, one of the reliefs that is built into the code is that if you as a business owner are offering education surrounding the 401k plan, to your staff members, this is called the 404C, education, requirement. It does provide some reliefs to you as a plan sponsor in terms of, the investment liability, right? And so it is a super important component. And, you should not only be offering, this, employee education, but you should maintain records of being able to demonstrate, like, hey, yes, we had an all-staff 401k education workshop. This is what was covered. And again, it's going to be very helpful in terms of reducing your overall liability. So there's, I think, so many different important components about a quality employee education offering.
And so when we bring it back to the idea of benchmarking and benchmarking services, what is your current advisor's employee education game plan? What are they offering throughout the year? Not just maybe one time a year you see them, or maybe every couple of years. So when you're benchmarking, a lot of times we think about, you'll hear if someone is soliciting you about, oh, we should benchmark your plan, they're going to dive right into fees. But I always say, and I think we both agree, let's start with, okay, regardless of fees, what are the services, and start with that advisor on the plan, right? What are they offering for what they're getting paid for? Absolutely.
Yeah, no, and there's a saying, in the absence of value, it comes down to cost, right? So high quality education offering, if I were an employer, yes, I would pay a little bit more for that, for sure.
For that value. Yeah, for sure. And then even in this sense of throughout the year, like if you have new hires and they become eligible, are you or is your staff taking the responsibility of showing these employees how to enroll and what investments they should be going into? Because if they are, that's a big red flag for you as a business owner and your HR team, because they probably are not securities licensed, and can leave you a little susceptible. So again, starting from a benchmarking aspect, looking at services in your advisor, what are you getting from that advisor and what are you paying them for those services.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, one of the unique things that, I found is that, I've created, custom education videos for each, plan that I work with. So
Right.
it allows people to be able to access this education, address their most commonly asked questions, allow their significant other, if they're in a relationship, to be able to see that data too, because
So nice.
I've seen time and again, where I go out to an employee, site and I provide, 401k education, employees leave, they're all excited, they're pumped about it. They go home, they take the materials to their spouse, and then the spouse is like, okay, tell me about it. And it's like, I don't know. This advisor came and he said it was amazing and said I should do it. And like, well, okay, cash flow is tight. Maybe we can do that later, right? So
exactly.
being able to provide all of the decision makers, the materials and the education that is needed, I think is just so important.
Absolutely.
That I've seen is just being available for staff members for one-on-one discussions. I mean, oftentimes in a group setting, like people don't want to ask questions because or share about their personal situation because they might feel a little bit embarrassed about it. So having that resource for to go and speak with an advisor in a confidential manner, I think is also a really important component.
Absolutely. And going along the guidelines of, what you should be looking at in benchmarking, we talked about services and what you're getting from those your advisor or your provider. But I do think it's still important. A big part of the benchmark is also just from the investment aspect, right? Mm-hmm. And making sure the fund menu is up to not necessarily industry standards, right? If you have a plan that only has money markets as options, right, that could be a pretty red flag. But from your point of view, like outside of the services, but also how you monitor the fund lineups and what you're offering employees is pretty important as far as the benchmark. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, in terms of, the investment component, what is the management process? Like if your plan were ever audited, this is something that an auditor would want to see is like, okay, well, you have this fund lineup, like how are you monitoring which funds to include in the lineup? And, if there's an issue with a fund, like at what point does that fund get replaced? So being able to demonstrate, the process behind that. Now we had an earlier show about 321 supports and 338 investment supports. So both of those can be an important part of being able to demonstrate your due diligence, having a clearly defined investment policy statement that you follow, and being able to, again, show the documentation behind it is just super important. Now, I've seen 401k plans where they, adopt an investment policy statement and they don't actually follow it. That is where you're just totally stepping on a landmine and shooting yourself, right? So if you're going to adopt an investment policy statement, you absolutely need to follow it, right? So
that's a great point, right? There's one thing to have an IPS.
Right.
It's another thing to actually follow through with it, right?
Totally.
And that's a huge thing you should be looking at when you hear the term benchmarking is not just the fund performances and the costs of the funds, but also is it following the objectives of the plan as well. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think another important component that the Department of Labor focuses on specifically is, the QDIA selection.
Yeah.
QDIA stands for Qualified Default Investment Alternative. So this is the investment that gets put into an employee's account if they don't proactively make an investment election. Now, a common QDIA can be, target date funds or lifestyle funds, for example. And so when you're going through and selecting the QDIA, one of the steps that you should be taking is looking at your overall employee demographic and looking at their average age, their compensation, average savings, right? And so each QDIA, each target date fund lineup is going to have slightly different attribution features, right? So some are going to tilt to be a little bit more aggressive, some are going to tilt to be a little bit more conservative. And so, taking that extra step and being able to document the QDIA process and say, okay, well, this is why we selected this specific target date fund and it's based upon our employee demographics, and being able to maintain and have that documentation on file is absolutely huge in terms of demonstrating that you've done your due diligence on monitoring the investment lineup.
Well said, Dominic. Well said. So now we'll stop picking on advisors for a second, right?
Yeah.
As far as benchmarking, but that is a huge core part to what a benchmark should be doing, right? As far as the services and investments. But now we'll switch gears as well to like, what is your record keeper or custodian or vendor? What are they providing for their fees? What kind of responsibilities are on your team's plate as the owner or the HR team? Because there's one thing we both know, Dominic, like our industry is continuing to evolve. just like
Absolutely.
everyone else is with AI. But there is a lot of technology out there that can do a lot of great things. So I bring that up because, of course, you want to know how much you're paying in fees, without a doubt. But also remember, like, what are you paying those fees for, right? So, like, some of the big pain points. I'm sure there's a lot of viewers out there that are going to resonate when they hear that they have to upload a payroll file or they have to manually punch in the payroll amounts every week or every 2 weeks. Well, in a benchmark, that's a good time to review who's your current payroll vendor yourself. What vendor are you using for the 401k? Maybe there's some ways and some solutions that we know are out there that we can automate a lot of that payroll nuisances, right? Or
Totally.
even what about notices? Like all our favorite notices, is your team or your HR team, or are they having to lick envelopes annually and ongoing to make sure participants are getting the proper notices? Have you heard about work to wire to work, email, electronic delivery? Like, so when you're doing these benchmarks, it's important to bring up these specific pain points that we see a lot of times in a day-to-day perspective. But I also think it's important that you pointed out earlier in the intro is just a review of the design, right? Maybe your demographics have changed. Maybe you allowed employees to enroll after 30 days, but you're getting a lot of turnover. Maybe you need to push that out. Maybe you're having testing issues. Maybe you need to explore safe harbor designs. Maybe the company has had some high tax bills recently, and maybe no one's talking to them about profit sharing that we showed in that illustration in the previous webinar. So again, a lot of times we hear about benchmarking, well, we can cut your fees in half. And I don't disagree. I think with our industry, every year there's always some type of pricing reduction and something marginalizing our industry. But be cautious of just hearing about fees, because what you should really be doing in a benchmark study is all the things we just discussed. Is that fair?
Absolutely. No, totally agree. I mean, again, like if you are paying less but receiving less value, like is that, an overall positive trade-off? Like, if we're able to be in a situation, and there's been so many plans where they haven't been benchmarked in 3 to 5 years, and I'm able to come in and I'm able to not only increase the supports provided to the plan sponsor and to the employees, but we also find a way to cut costs. Like when there's that situation,
what a win-win.
Slam dunk.
What a win-win. And that's the important part, because to the DOL's point, when they always get everything right, but every 2 to 3 years is the minimum or per administrative feasible. But that's a great point, right? You can do a lot of enhancements and still potentially save fees if you haven't benchmarked in a while, right?
Yep.
And I think what we'll end with this webinar, Dom, is I don't know if you have it up or you can put it up here, but how you personally, when you work with prospects and clients, how you make benchmarking plans a little bit easier by just going to your website, right? Is that fair to say as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a specific tool and resource that I use, and I have this quick questionnaire. It shouldn't take more than 5 to 10 minutes for you as a plan sponsor to be able to answer, and it looks at all these different components. So looking at participant support, the investment process, overall fiduciary governance, provider management, plan design. And it breaks it down to a quantitative score. And so we can clearly see, like, okay, yes, we're doing these, components in the investment lineup, for example, but we're missing in a couple of different areas. It'll create this score between 0 being the worst to 100 being the best about how the overall operations of your plan is, being run and being managed. It just makes this whole benchmarking process so much easier. And again, it only takes 5-10 minutes to take the quiz, and from that I'm able to generate this report and be able to show HR directors, CFOs, CEOs who are running and managing these benefits exactly how their plan is stacking up.
It's so slick. And I would just add to that point is, like, Dominic, you could talk to a prospect and say, hey, here's my fees. We can probably save you in half. But what kind of value is that other than saving fees? If they're willing to take the 5-10 minutes to go through it, now you can have a deeper conversation with them about the different services that you're going to bring. And at that point, who really cares about cost if you can do so much more for the client on a day-to-day basis, right?
Absolutely. I said it in a previous show, but I'm going to say it again. I think a huge underlying issue with 401k plans is, there's not the time and the question being, asked, what is the goal of this retirement plan benefit, right? And how can we best, adjust this plan to create the outcome that you as an owner, for the organization, for employees, like what is, how can we create the best benefit offering for the company goals and participant goals?
That's the key. That's what we do every day, right? Well, awesome. Well, I think on the keep a lookout for the next webinar as we'll actually dive into a live example of how we benchmark and look at certain things of specific plants. We'll try not to pick on any record keepers because it's pretty unanimous across the board, but I'm excited to dive into one and show a live example.
Likewise. Thanks for joining.
We'll see you, Dom. Thanks, everybody.